Story 1. Carrie Packer frequented a particular casino often. One night, after a good run, he wanted to tip the dealer. She declined as per casino policy. He asked to see her supervisor, who affirmed that it was against company policy for employees to accept tips from customers. He demanded that they fire her or he would never come back. They obliged. He then said, "Well, now she is not an employee. I can tip her," and gave her a large sum of money. The supervisor accepted it. Carrie then said, "Hire her back again, or I will never come back to your casino." She got her job back and kept the tip. Story 2. I used to work with companies that build super yachts. It happened several times that the interior of a vessel was finished with over $500,000 worth of marble, after which the owner walked in, decided he did not like the color in hindsight, and requested it all to be removed again. Story 3. The chief executive officer of my company is a very reliable person. He dislikes one of our competitors so much that he bought a billboard right outside the competitor's office and kept our advertisement up until they moved to a new location. Story 4. A man I used to work for thought it would be funny to hire a limousine to take a friend to lunch. The restaurant was next door to where they were. The limousine company refused to rent by the hour and said he had to hire it for the entire day. He was angry, so he just bought a limousine. After lunch, he was still angry and decided to buy a few more and start his own limousine company. A month or two later, he bought the company that refused him an hourly rental. Story 5. Billionaire Howard Hughes reserved the top 2 floors of the Desert Inn in Las Vegas for 10 days. When his 10 days were up, the hotel asked him to check out. He was not ready to leave, so he bought the hotel and stayed there for 4 years. Story 6. I am an employment and contract attorney. In my younger days, I was corporate counsel for a large hospital. We were in the midst of a fundraising campaign and were a few $1,000,000 from our goal. I received a call from a wealthy, young man who offered to cover the remainder plus 10% with 2 conditions. He used to work at the hospital when he was younger and had made his fortune with a medical device company he started. He wanted a voting member board seat. He also wanted to fire a vice president who had been his supervisor when he worked there and had made his life miserable. This person was the reason he quit and eventually went into business for himself. I took the request to the board and CEO. They agreed to the board seat, but I could not advise allowing the firing for liability reasons. However, the CEO decided to reorganize certain departments, and coincidentally, this vice president's position was eliminated. The new board member chaired the committee that made the decision on the reorganization and informed the vice president of the changes. That was the biggest act of retaliation and long-term grudge I have ever seen. Story 7. My uncle bought a $900,000 small shop in 2012 with cash, just so it would not be torn down because he liked to go there as a kid. It was literally just an abandoned small store in downtown Evansville. I have no idea what the store is. All I know is that it is near the casino and was bought at the end of 2012. I do not even know if he still owns it. He could have sold it or demolished it. He runs multiple businesses in Evansville, Indianapolis, Louisville, Frankfurt, and Nashville. Story 8. I worked at a high-end eco-resort some time ago. We spent weeks preparing for some guests who had booked half the resort for him and his family. We made many renovations and changes in the cabins and rooms because the man was very picky, but he was spending a lot, so we accommodated his requests. We even rebuilt the motor on another boat and outfitted it for downrigging because they needed 3 fishing boats. The man arrived for his reservation, and the first thing he did was start cussing and belittling the woman at the front desk. The owner walked in to see what the problem was, and the man proceeded to insult the front desk woman in front of him. The owner said, "I'm terribly sorry you feel that way. We will give you a full refund on your deposit so you can find somewhere better to stay." The man's face turned pale, and he started apologizing and pleading, but the owner did not care. The man had to go to the parking lot and explain to his entire family how his bad temper ruined their 1-week vacation and that they would have to find another place to stay. The owner did not care how much extra money the man had spent. He was not going to accept that behavior, and more importantly, he was not going to let the staff take that abuse. He was not my favorite boss, but that is something I respect. Story 9. My friend knows a man who flew his private jet from London to France for lunch. After finishing lunch, his jet experienced maintenance issues. Instead of waiting 2 to 3 hours for repairs, he approached another private jet owner and offered a large enough check to compensate for the inconvenience in order to buy the jet immediately. Story 10. Ferruccio Lamborghini. Back in the day, he got rich building tractors and he bought himself a Ferrari because he was Italian, and it was the thing to do when you became successful. Unfortunately, sports car clutches back then were poor and failed often. He went to Ferrari himself and said he could fix the problem, but was told to go back to his tractors because he knew nothing about high-performance cars. The encyclopedia says he made cars to compete with Ferrari and the others, but in reality, he did it to spite Ferrari. Starting a car factory to spite someone is an epic level of defiance. Story 11. The Abu Dhabi royal family funded and placed their name, Khalifa, on the world's tallest building. Dubai ran out of money to complete it. Story 12. My friend's mother-in-law has a wonderful home on Cape Cod. It is not one of the huge McMansion eyesores that started showing up in nearby towns in the 1980s. It is just a very comfortable, well-designed, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house on a hillside with lots of beautiful hand-hewn woodwork and an incredible view of the coast just a couple of streets downhill. The house was built in the mid-1950s, and while there are not many strict legal boundaries regarding what can and cannot be built, renovated, expanded, or demolished, the people in this community have been happily coexisting well for the past 75 years. You can count the number of incidents on one hand, and everyone knows who tried to do what with their house or land. The neighbor who lived one street downhill, between my friend's mother-in-law and the coast, sadly passed away during the COVID-19 pandemic. Because his children had moved away, the property went to market and was immediately purchased for well over asking price by some Boston-based technology professional. Within a month, he started demolishing the retaining walls and driveway to allow access for the general contractor he had hired to tear down the existing house. The house had been meticulously cared for and fit well in the neighborhood. He planned to build a new concrete and glass structure that would have completely blocked the line of sight to the coast for at least 4 houses located uphill. I was not aware of the options available to my friend's mother-in-law, but after a few neighbors introduced themselves to the new arrival and expressed their concerns, she paid him 5% above what he paid for the house. No loans, no refinancing on her existing home, no payment plan. Just bought it outright for more than I will earn in the next 25 years, even if I am lucky. The downhill house is now rented well below market value to a lovely family with 2 children. Story 13. I met a man in rehabilitation who was so wealthy that after group, he flew the rest of us across state lines on a private jet he had prepared and took us skydiving, then got us back home before our sober living curfew. When we landed at the other airport, the instructors already knew about our arrival and had our parachutes and gear laid out, ready to prepare everyone, as if he had just told them, "My friends and I are going to skydive in a few hours. Be ready for us." He did this all on a whim that day. Some of the people had outstanding warrants and were not supposed to travel, especially across state lines, so the house manager was not happy. That man was a close friend. Some people tried to take advantage of his generosity, but I genuinely liked him. He tried to buy me dinner, but I insisted on paying my own share because he was so generous and caring. I felt bad accepting. It was sad that he was struggling because he was so kind and generous with his money. I also visited his large, expensive Orange County mansion, and he made me the best steak I have ever had. I hope he is doing well. Story 14. This is more of a suggestion to reconsider rather than a strong refusal. Growing up, our neighbor was incredibly wealthy, probably in the low 9 figures, owned a tremendous amount of land, and could likely influence the price of beef with the amount of cattle he had, as well as oil. He was in his 80s and his health was deteriorating. His children arrived while he was recovering from surgery and told him they did not want him driving anymore, then took his truck. As soon as they left, he called a local dealership and had a brand new truck delivered an hour later. The children returned the next day, and he told them he decided he wanted to keep driving and was prepared to buy a new truck every day if necessary. Story 15. Notoriously, Mark Cuban was fined for using explicit language on a broadcast. Upon learning that the fine goes to charity, he said it again. Story 16. Kerry Packer was playing poker in Las Vegas when a Texan approached the table and was being a nuisance. The Texan was asked to calm down and responded, "Don't you know who I am? I am worth $100 million. Packer apparently interjected, "I'll flip you for it." Kerry Packer was worth $4 billion at the time of his death. His life story is a fascinating tale. Story 17. I know someone who tried to build a large garage in their backyard to run their business. The neighbor complained to the town planning board and blocked the construction. He bought the empty land next to the neighbor's house and donated it to Habitat for Humanity so they would build a house there to upset the neighbor. He then got revised plans approved by the planning board for his large garage to hold his sailboat. That did not exist. Story 18. My uncle made a lot of money in investment banking. Seemingly out of the blue, he decided to buy a chain of shops after being fired for catching his manager having an affair with another employee. He bought the shops with a partner. The shop owner and the managers only ever saw the other partner. He said he made it a point to keep the personnel in place after the sale. On the first day after taking ownership, he walked in and fired the manager who had fired him. Then he gave everyone else raises and made sure the former employee heard about it. Story 19. Not Jeff Bezos money or anything, but my grandmother sold her condominium and bought a house down the street because the condominium association would not let her paint her mailbox the color she wanted. Story 20. My dad witnessed a coworker win the lottery, walk straight into the boss's office, scream "forget you" at the top of his voice, and walk out. This was over 40 years ago, and he never saw the man again. Story 21. A lady with a private jet was told there was nowhere at the local airport where she could leave it, so she bought a regional airline called Viking Air. Story 22. In real life, a family friend of ours owns a very successful national company. His wife's Jaguar sports coupe was stolen from their driveway. He noticed at about 6 a.m. when he got up for work. He called the Jaguar dealer principal, who is known to him personally, and had a new replacement car there by lunchtime, in exactly the same color and trims. His wife apparently did not notice until about 4 days later when the police arrived with what was left of her Jaguar. Good times. Story 23. Recently, I found out that Jeff Bezos was sitting in his living room when he randomly had the idea to find the Apollo 11 engines at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. He purchased all the necessary equipment, assembled a team, and successfully located them. Story 24. I knew a man who owned a machine shop and factory next to an industrial complex I managed. I met him on site at about 6 a.m. as he was walking through the gates. He was dressed like a homeless man and told me he used to use our gates as a shortcut to get to his factory. He would wander through and slip through a hole in the fence to access his factory because he couldn't be bothered walking around. We started talking and it turned out he lived in the area, which at that time was a rough area, full of industrial land and some rough residential neighborhoods. His family had once owned all the land around when it was farmland, gradually selling it off, but he stayed in the family home. In short, he was a very wealthy man. He was eccentric but shrewd and seriously rich. He told me a story about neighbors who had moved in and were parking their cars on his driveway. He asked them to stop, but they did not. Knowing they were renting, he bought the house and evicted them. Story 25. I had a boss who would take the whole team out to dinner, order every appetizer and dessert on the menu for everyone, and expect us to order an entree on top of that. She gave my supervisor her corporate credit card for drinks for the team, including the interns, and told her to return it on Monday. I want to be that rich and awesome someday. Story 26. A former boss of mine was going through a contentious divorce. Her husband had left town for Florida with another woman, abandoning my boss and their son. When the divorce was being finalized, it was time to divide assets. She was the primary earner, and the judge ruled that she had to either give him one of her vehicles, as she had several large trucks, or buy him a new one. Her husband was very tall, standing 6 feet 7 inches, and was a former bodybuilder. Instead of giving him one of her trucks, she bought him a brand new Toyota Prius. This large man looked like he was driving a small car around town, which was quite amusing. Story 27. Without talking about multimillionaires and billionaires, I have seen multiple people in my career who would have worked until 65 and started taking no nonsense in either corporate or government roles. They were reprimanded for various things between 45 and 55 years old. I have seen people literally say to executive suite levels, "Forget you," in a group setting and walk out, heading off into the sunset with no regrets. Story 28. We have a disabled daughter, and we're able to enroll her in a private preschool for free in exchange for sharing the positive experiences the school provided. We spoke at their big charity ball and were seated at a wealthy table where everyone was captivated by our story. We were quite poor at the time and were literally putting the fancy rolls in my wife's purse. During the auction portion of the night, one of the ladies told us that last year she won the auction for an all-expense-paid first-class luxury safari in Africa, but she had no one to accompany her, so she donated it back to the school this year. Halfway through the bidding for the safari, she said, "Oh, my niece loves animals. I could have taken her," and went on to win it again. She bid $15,000 that night and said she paid about $12,000 to win it the first time, which was 20 years ago. We went home and used those rolls to enhance our Carl Buddig deli meat sandwiches for the next week. Story 29. A $5,200 bar tab was added to the room bill. They signed it and walked away as if it were a pack of gum at a general store. Story 30. Popeye's Chicken decided to start charging 25 cents for sauce. They even acted as if you were trying to steal from them by asking for it at the second window. I cannot order just sauces in the app, so I gave them $5 and told them to give me 20 honey mustards. This is paying with intent. Story 31. Ed Sheeran spent $4 million to buy a neighbor's house after the neighbor filed noise complaints. Story 32. Lucky enough to get into a super premium high roller room at a casino in Nevada, not in Las Vegas. Watched a man play blackjack with $25,000 in chips do this. $100,000 win lets it ride. $200,000 win lets it ride. $400,000 win lets it ride. $800,000 on the table. Loses. Stands up, tosses the dealer a $1,000 chip, and walks away like it was nothing. Pretty amazing. Either the man has true wealth or is just reckless. Story 33. When I was 15, I was riding with my good friend and his incredibly wealthy family to a theme park when his car, a Mercedes with all the upgrades, started making a strange noise. He pulled into a gas station, and the car would not start. His eldest son came and picked us up. I did not think anything was out of the ordinary. Later that day, I found out that he had left the car in the parking lot and went to buy a brand new one. Story 34. Cristiano Ronaldo bought an island and moved his family onto it at the onset of the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic. Story 35. My clients were discussing their tab from brunch at a champagne party in Aspen. 1. That tab seemed kind of high. $36,000? 2. No, there was the cover charge with the first tray of 4 bottles. Then we paid for the ones for those girls, then 2 more for us and 1 for the guys from the company. 1. I guess that makes sense, plus the reserve that nobody got to drink because Mark sprayed it all over those Instagram models. 3. How was I supposed to know it was an $8,000 bottle? 2. Because it said 1947 on the bottle in big letters. 3. Whatever. I'll get dinner or something and we'll call it even. Casually implying dinner will be another $36,000. Story 36. My dad used to do handyman work for a wealthy man. He had a house in the hills with several acres. Someone bought one of the hills next to him and started building a house. He did not like how it looked, so he bought the property from them, halted construction, and removed all traces of it. Then, he did not like how much land surrounded him without a fence, as his property line was now too far to see. So, he had a fence installed across the middle of his land so he could see a boundary. Story 37. About 20 years ago, I worked the flight line at a fixed base operator, basically a place at the airport where private planes park and get service. I worked at a more upscale fixed base operator, so we mostly handled Cessna Citation jets, Gulfstream jets, and similar private jets. One day, a customer who was repeatedly described to me as the Prince of Saudi Arabia came in on his personal McDonnell Douglas DC-10. This plane was huge and complicated compared to most of our customers' aircraft, partly because it was a special, head of state, very wealthy, tricked-out DC-10. Among other things visible from the exterior was a full suite of military countermeasures, missile jammers, chaff, flares, and several others I couldn't identify. He was only scheduled to be there a few days. On his planned departure date, he arrived with an entourage in Bentleys, stepped out, then before boarding said, "I want to go shopping." The entourage packed up and left immediately. Days went by, then a week, then two. Management raised their daily cost for parking considerably, charging thousands of dollars a day. But the prince didn't care. Day in and day out, we stared at this billionaire's plane, sharing theories about what was inside. A month passed. Then one day, all hands on deck. The prince wanted to leave that night. We had to prepare the DC-10 with full amenities in just a few hours. We scrambled, fueling the plane, running through checks, servicing the lavatories, and so on. When the catering team needed help, we all volunteered so we could get a look inside the plane. I entered, and on my left was the cockpit. Behind the cockpit was an armored security room that looked like something from the movie Crimson Tide, a room with screens, radar, cameras, and controls for all the advanced military equipment. I turned right and saw a narrow corridor passing the prince's private room. Behind the private room was a lounge with a coffee bar, couches, lots of artwork, and gold trim. Further back was a more traditional airline cabin with business-class size seats for about 30 to 40 staff members. I will never forget what I saw when I looked into the prince's private room. It was like something out of a Judd Apatow movie, almost a parody of itself. In the center was a king-sized bed covered with satin sheets and a tiger fur blanket. The ceiling above the bed was a mirror. The room was dimly lit in warm red and orange tones with opulent plush furniture and expensive-looking decorations. To top it off, a portrait of the prince in a military uniform hung directly over the bed. So yes, there are private jets, and then there are extremely wealthy private jets. Story 38. I used to work for a financial services company. The chief executive officer was a very rich man. Not a household name, but consistently ranked in the Forbes top 10 for the wealthiest people in the state. He was a billionaire. We were moving office spaces, and his assistants were packing up his office and files. One day, an assistant brought over a folder with paperwork for a boat. She asked him if he still owned the boat or if she could dispose of the documents. He did not know if he still owned the boat. He could not remember and said he would have to contact someone to confirm. How much money do you have to have, or how many boats must you own, to forget something like this? Story 39. I am a structural engineer. I was working on a wealthy client's house, and he asked me for ideas to make his main staircase stand out more. However, at that point, the project had gone on too long and basically needed to end. I showed him a few pictures of a remarkable feature staircase I had designed for a hotel and told him it would probably cost $100,000, which is double or even triple, but I was trying to discourage him. I explained that he could achieve the same look by cladding the regular staircase we had already designed for him. He thought about it for 10 seconds and said, "I love it. Do it." I thought I was exaggerating the cost so much that he would give up and move on. After I told the architect, he laughed and told me about 5 other things in the house that were going to be unnecessarily customized just to stand out. Custom lighting fixtures, one-off in between sizes and colors. This client was apparently willing to spend $1 million just to have everything exactly the way he wanted. Story 40. Wasn't there a Saudi princess who bought a $350 million super yacht just to have a party on it or something like that? That is like pocket change to them. Story 41. My oldest brother is the best big brother I could ever ask for, even before he became successful. His only job has been working for Kroger, starting when he was 16. He is now an important executive in Cincinnati at the corporate office. He gave me a bottle of whiskey worth over $20,000 because he could not find a place for it in his bar cabinet at his vacation house in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Story 42. My ex worked at a very expensive, very private golf course. One day, a few members were playing poker in the lounge for $5 to $10 a hand when a new member asked to join. When he heard the stakes, he said something like, "What is the point of that? We are all wealthy. Let's play for real money." Nobody was really interested. They just wanted to play for fun, but the new member insisted. Finally, the oldest member said, "Okay, let's play. What is your net worth?" The younger man smugly replied, $2 million. The older man said, "All right, Let's play the next hand for $2 million. Straight up. The younger man became upset, saying he just wanted to have fun and complained about the older man's attitude. The older man responded, I am worth $30 million, but I do not need to be rude to prove it. Now, be quiet and play or leave. The younger man chose not to play and apparently canceled his membership a week later. Story 43. Here in the United States, I was at a FedEx store, and the family ahead of me had a rather large box, about 36 by 36 by 36 inches. I heard them say the address it was to be sent to in the United Kingdom with a British accent. Seems normal so far, right? The cashier asked when he wanted it to arrive. Note, this was around noon. He said tomorrow with a straight face. The cashier laughed and said something like, Sir, that will be about $1,200. The customer simply said, That's fine, and handed over his Black American Express card. My jaw hit the floor. This was a stereo setup for his brother's birthday. Yes, that's quite impressive. Story 44. This story's lore grows with every retelling, but it is one of my favorites from growing up. There was a restaurant outside my small town. A billionaire was eating there without showing his status at all. He asked for fries on the side of his meal instead of mashed potatoes. The waitress made a big deal about how the place did not do substitutions. He politely pointed out that they had French fries on their menu, so he was not sure what the issue was. She reiterated that mashed potatoes were the assigned side for his meal, and they would not switch it. He escalated to a manager who said fries were no problem. That probably would have been the end of it. But the waitress would not let it go, haranguing him throughout the meal, talking loudly about him within earshot, really addressing him directly. She was generally obnoxious for no reason, making a big deal out of nothing. So he quietly bought the restaurant for twice what it was worth, allowing the owners to retire early, and fired the woman. Story 45. I worked for a BMW dealership. A customer came in during a sales event. He saw a fully loaded BMW X5M in the showroom, had a look at it, and told the salesman, I don't have one that's red with red leather interior. I'll take it. He bought it outright and put it on the trailer he brought with him to take it home. He didn't even test drive it. It was almost 200,000 Canadian dollars, which is about 140,000 US dollars. Story 46. I work for a railroad, and several times I have seen the railroad offer millions to people with junk sheds because they were in the way of recovery operations. Story 47. I don't know if this counts, but I have seen people in really nice cars or with special plates who park on purpose in prohibited spots, not handicap spots, for long periods of time. They prefer to just get the ticket and struggle to find a spot or go to the next nearest parking lot. I think this could be an example of wealth, choosing to spend $120 for a fine rather than dealing with the burden of walking from their cars. Story 48. Post Malone spent $2.6 million to buy the One Ring, a Magic the Gathering card. Wizards of the Coast printed many copies of the same card, but there was one unique copy with different artwork and the text written in Elvish, like a Wonka golden ticket. Story 49. I was not around for the meeting, but when my great-grandmother died, my great-aunts argued fiercely about the funeral costs. It got to the point where they were arguing so intensely that my uncle pulled out a few $100s, slammed it on the table, and said it was covered. After that, everyone stopped arguing. Story 50. George Harrison and the most expensive cinema ticket he ever bought. Originally, the Monty Python film Life of Brian was backed by EMI Films, a British film studio, but shortly before production was set to begin, EMI withdrew from the project. The head of EMI at the time, Bernard Delfont, was concerned about the controversial religious themes of the film, which could have been perceived by the public as blasphemous. This left the project without financing and nearly led to the film being cancelled. At this point, George Harrison, the former guitarist of the Beatles, stepped in. Harrison was a big fan of Monty Python and was determined to save the film. He founded his own production company, Handmade Films, and provided £3 million, approximately $5 million US dollars at the time, to finance the film. Harrison even went so far as to mortgage his own house to raise the necessary funds. He later explained jokingly that he made the film because he really wanted to see it, describing it as the most expensive cinema ticket he ever bought. Story 51. I read an article about a Saudi princess who went on a $20 million shopping spree in Geneva. She needed 4 trucks to deliver everything to her home. She never opened or used the items. Story 52. There's a wealthy couple near where I live who built a beautiful new house on the ocean. Across the street was an old building that housed a neighborhood bar. Shortly after they moved in, the owner of the bar decided to retire and put the building up for sale. This was the only commercially zoned property in the entire neighborhood. They bought it immediately to prevent someone else from buying it and opening a store or a bank. They completely renovated the bar and now use it as a private club for their friends and family. Story 53. Back in 2008, the United Arab Emirates paid more than $1 billion to bail out the city of Chicago in a deal with Morgan Stanley and Mayor Daley. In exchange, they received the profits of the 36,000 parking meters for the next 75 years. Story 54. He is difficult, but Peter Thiel funded Hulk Hogan's lawsuit against Gawker, which ultimately led to their bankruptcy because he was upset they revealed his sexual orientation. Story 55. My dad's former golf buddy made a lot of money in finance. He was a total jerk. He loved racing cars at a local track. During a race, another driver cut him off, so he deliberately crashed and totaled both cars to prevent the other driver from finishing one place ahead of him, in 5th place. It wasn't even to win. He just wanted to upset the other driver. I bet you are still a jerk, Scott. Story 56. I work at an optometrist clinic, and this man comes in every 2 years with his bags of 30 pairs of glasses to change the lenses with a new prescription. He spends around $30,000 only on glasses. Story 57. A man was denied membership at a golf club, so he started his own club next door. Story 58. I went to a Midwestern wedding reception around 2007 or 2008 that served alcohol. There was a beer that the couple picked, and you could get one for free. Any additional drinks and all other beverages were cash bar. The marrying couple were in their early 20s and were starting out in life with limited money. One of the groom's cousins, a senior-level employee from Microsoft recently arrived from Seattle, said he would pay for all drinks so everyone could enjoy themselves. He was surprised at how little the bill turned out to be relative to the size of the gathering, around $3,000 for 250 people. Story 59. Jeff Bezos is spending $42 million to dig a hole in a mountain to build a large clock that will last 10,000 years. The largest expenditure might be the $44 billion Elon Musk spent on purchasing Twitter just to post memes. Story 60. Kerry Packer was an Australian billionaire with a few good stories. Probably the most famous, which I always assumed was just a story but was actually true, involved Mr. Packer having a disagreement with a loudmouth Texan at a poker table. Packer declined his request to join the table. The Texan responded, "I'm a high roller too. I'm worth over $100 million. To which Packer replied, "If you really feel like gambling, I'll flip you for it." After Packer died, someone high up in the resort group confirmed the story had actually happened. He had a heart attack and gave every ambulance worker and anyone involved in his survival $1 million each. He also paid off a waitress's mortgage after accidentally bumping into her and knocking her tray of drinks over. There are many more stories like these. Story 61. He wanted to surprise his mother for her birthday, so he flew from Spain to Hawaii to surprise her at the hotel where she was staying. He took her out to lunch and then flew back to Spain. He apparently decided he liked Madrid so much about 15 years ago that he never really left after visiting for spring break. He seems to have enough in his trust fund that he never has to worry about money. It is there for him to spend on endless parties in Spain and flying to parties across Europe and Asia. He seemed genuinely perplexed that I did not just buy my building when I complained about the cost of rent, as if everyone has $350,000 just sitting around to casually spend. Story 62. I once worked for a company started by a husband and wife. The wife liked to write essays about her political opinions and include them in the company's marketing. One day, she wrote an entire essay about how she hates electric cars and how they are a terrible idea for America. The next day, her husband bought a Tesla and proudly parked it on company property. The two of them do not get along very well. Story 63. The time Mark Cuban got fined for saying an expletive on television, so he said it again and challenged them to double the fine. Story 64. These individuals are towing a Bentley race car with a vintage Bentley from 1931. Story 65. I went to a birthday party at a play center. As part of the package, the children received a small lunchbox with some chocolate, chips, and the choice of either a jam, cheese, or ham sandwich. The parents did not ask ahead of time which sandwiches the children wanted, so they bought each child 3 lunchboxes, one of each, so they could just grab the one they wanted. Story 66. At the train station, there is a toy train in a glass display case. My 4-year-old loves it. It costs 2 Danish kroner to make it run for about 30 seconds. The toy train is located inside Joe and the Juice, but people rarely carry change in Denmark. Often, children cannot see the train run. One day, on my way home from work, a small boy was quietly sobbing on his mother's lap because the train could not run. I turned around, walked to the bank, and got 252 kroner coins. I gave the mother 5 coins and gave the rest to the employee at the counter with instructions to allow free trips whenever children came in. It was not a large spending spree, but I was upset about all the missed moments children could have had. Story 67. I was standing in line at the post office when an elderly woman was asking everyone if she could pass through, because she only needed 1 lottery ticket. She was not asking politely and was making comments about people not moving fast enough, being disrespectful to the elderly. The first man in line heard her and was tired of her attitude. He asked the cashier how many lottery tickets were left for that week's lottery, and it was about 100 tickets. He bought them all. Story 68. I had a teacher in high school who taught carpentry and a media photography class. He was genuinely the best teacher I ever had. He was kind, caring, funny, and was only a teacher because he enjoyed it. It was well known throughout the school that he was wealthy. He owned a number of restaurants, several large medical office buildings, and, as he put it, dabbled in stocks. I don't know how much money he really had, but he was definitely a little petty with it. His neighbor's dog was constantly defecating in his yard, and after months of nothing being done about it, he went to the neighbor's bank and bought out his mortgage. The neighbor had to start making his mortgage payments to my teacher, or at least one of his businesses, and, surprise, surprise, no more dog issues. Story 69. We built a mansion for a client who wrote a $25,000 check to code enforcement and told them to come back when the money ran out because all of us subcontractors had nowhere to store equipment or materials except the city street and sidewalks. Story 70. This is like very low-scale financial independence. In my town of around 3,000 people, if not less, where I grew up, there was a single pizzeria. The owner was great, constantly giving free items to kids who ordered and adding extras. Another pizza place opened, and within a couple of days, he had bought the place just to close it immediately. Story 71. All I can say is go to a poor country if you want to feel like you have unlimited money, but you are just sort of middle class in the United States. I went traveling with my wife back to her home country and paid for everything for 4 adults for 4 days and did not even bother looking at the bills I was signing at one point. I do not think I even spent $1,000 for what felt like unlimited fun during that time. Story 72. A friend of my mom wanted to open a restaurant on a specific corner. I think it was a place he used to eat as a kid. A liquor store had opened on that corner after the old restaurant shut down. He offered to buy the liquor store owner out to use that property, but the liquor store owner refused. So he built a liquor store literally double the size right across the street, walked in, handed the guy the keys, and said to leave. Then he opened his restaurant where he wanted. Story 73. An old manager wanted to fire someone for forging signatures on a safety document. Human Resources said he could not just fire someone because there was a process. His response was, "Let them sue me, I have more money than they do." Story 74. There was a teenage girl on a hiking trip with us. In the middle of the mountains, she said she did not want to walk anymore. 15 minutes later, she was picked up by her private helicopter. Story 75. Former professional bodyguard here. I have worked for several well-known billionaires. Some watch every cent while others spend money freely. I had one foreign client who offered to pay me $5,000 to beat up a girl's boyfriend at a club one night. He became furious when I refused. The situation went downhill for him for the rest of the night. He screamed at me in a different language during the entire drive back to his place. Story 76. I was invited to a wedding once as a guest. The bride's father was a billionaire. It was in Charlevoix, Michigan, on their 5-house property. Armed private security, live band flown in from Los Angeles. There was a barge on the lake that shot off fireworks at the end of the evening, the whole event. The real money moment was the next day when they hosted a catered sending-off breakfast at their residence. I was snacking on an everything bagel, and the groom approached me. He asked if I liked the bagels. I said yes, it was a good bagel. He followed up with, "Good. I had them baked and flown in from New York City this morning." Story 77. My dad's friend went to Perdido Bay, Alabama, as a child in the 1940s and 1950s. He loved the pine forests and wildlife around the bay. In the 1970s, he learned of a developer wanting to build a resort on the Back Bay. Since then, he has purchased over 110,000 acres of the Perdido Bay watershed in Alabama and Florida and has developed less than 20 acres. His will leaves the land to a trust that aims to make it a national wildlife refuge. Story 78. Not the best story, but around 12 years ago, my younger brother had some legal troubles and a substance issue. My family was poor by every definition of the word. We have some very wealthy relatives, and my mother's cousin wrote my mother a check to help pay for legal fees and a rehabilitation facility. The bank told my mother the check was so large it would take between 10 and 14 days to clear and be posted to the account. My mother was hysterical and in tears because if you've ever been poor, when you need money, you need it immediately. My aunt came down and tried to get it cleared, but it didn't help. She called her husband and told him the situation, saying my mother was her family and she needed to help now. Within 5 minutes, the bank manager came out with an updated balance sheet showing the check had been posted and cleared and could be used immediately. Apparently, my uncle called and said every person associated with him would be transferring or closing their accounts by the week's end. Just he and his wife's accounts were worth millions of dollars, not including his children. I thought it was pretty impressive. Story 79. My uncle brings a semi-truck fully loaded with food, water, equipment including toilets, outdoor shower, water heater, enough generators and batteries for a village, and toys when going hunting for a week. He hires a crew of 3, 1 chef to cook for him, 1 to keep the base camp clean, and 1 to maintain vehicles and toys they bring. My dad goes with a regular tent, some sandwiches, and his pickup truck. He says he would rather drive into town if he needs something. I personally think my uncle goes way overboard. Story 80. My boss is ultra wealthy. He lives up the hill from Dr. Dre and was friends and neighbors with Tom Brady, among other people. One of his neighbors is T-Pain. The story was shared that T-Pain moved into the house and did not like the facade. So he was paying to have it removed and changed to something else. This is common for mansions where you want to change the appearance without replacing the whole structure. Anyway, the workers spent quite some time removing the facade when T-Pain decided that no, he actually kind of liked it. So he paid them to rebuild it exactly as it had been. There were other stories like my boss having a Super Bowl party and them having to bring the animals inside like the camel and alligator. Apparently, this ruined his expensive wood floors, and he did not even blink at having to spend $30,000 to replace them. There is definitely a different reality when you have that sort of money, but I still really like my boss. He is extremely nice, driven, and the single most charismatic person I have ever met. It is easy to see how he became wealthy. Story 81. I was once acquainted with a man who convinced the Homeowners Association to create a specific list of exotic animals banned from the neighborhood. He then bought a liger and a taigan, as well as a few other less dangerous animals because they were not on the list. I guess if the Homeowners Association had taken him to court, they would have won, but it would have been very expensive. Story 82. Both very cool guys. This is a car enthusiast story. At a car show, a man brought his $1.7 million full carbon fiber race car. It was a 2023 model and had to be trailered. The car was incredible. I can't even imagine driving it on a track. I'm an experienced driver, but I certainly couldn't handle that. He had brought a couple of other cars as well. A super nice guy, his wife was fun to talk to, and I chatted with his mother-in-law for a bit as well. He had done well for himself. Parked next to that was a 1977 Porsche RSR Lite. Just a regular-looking old Porsche. The mid-30-year-old who had driven to the show was driving it just to make sure it was mechanically sound. His friend, the owner of the Porsche, wanted him to ensure it was ready for the owner's upcoming lap of the Pacific Northwest. He didn't have time to drive it himself. That Porsche is one of about 200 made and roughly one of 30 in that color worldwide. It is also worth nearly $1.7 million. Having your friend drive your car worth that much just so it gets driven because you don't have the time is definitely luck you money. It is definitely not the owner's only high-value car. He probably has more cars than I have lug nuts on my 4 vehicles. Story 83. On a smaller scale compared to many other stories, my friend's millionaire friend took him and a group of friends to stay in a very expensive London hotel. He ordered a round of expensive shots for everyone, and a little later my friend asked the waiter for another shot. Does sir know how much these shots cost? About £100 each. The millionaire was in earshot and called the waiter over. Sir does know how much these shots cost. Bring over a new bottle and leave it here. Story 84. Eating in restaurants and seeing bills of 20,000. If I pay 300 for some fancy dinner, it's a lot for me, and I do this only on special occasions. But the food in the restaurant is 150 per person, so having a bill of 20,000 is purely from drinking expensive wines. Some people have too much money. Story 85. I used to work as a cook at an expensive boutique hotel. A party of about 50 to 100 people from a local cannabis startup asked to rent our banquet hall for a party and inquired if they could smoke there. The floor manager said smoking was not allowed in the banquet hall, but they offered $25,000 to rent the top 2 floors, which were suites, where they could do whatever they wanted. They accepted the offer and proceeded accordingly. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.